My name is Corah. We're studying 1st and 2nd Kings during the complete survey of the Old Testament series. You can find it at nativemi.org as well as Right Now Media. If you go to nativemi.org, go to Ministries, go to Right Now Media, you'll get an invite to this, so you'll have the coding. Now, 1st Kings involves the reigns of the kings of Israel and Judah after David's death. Authors unknown, possibly Jeremiah. Now, 1st Kings, Solomon succeeds David as king of Israel and builds the temple of Jerusalem. Now, the construction of the temple is a significant milestone for Solomon. Division: after Solomon's death, the kingdom divides in two, the north and south, Judah and the south. And the prophets like Elijah and Elisha confront the kings of Israel and call them to repentance. Ups and downs of the kings of Israel. Now the title is 1st and 2nd Kings. It's treated as one book in ancient Hebrew in that it was written that way. We've added chapters and books as we study the Bible. Now, the names of individuals who led the United Kingdom as well as the divided kingdom are here. The date and setting of 1st and 2nd Kings. It involves 120 years, beginning of Solomon's reign in 1970 to 851 BC, midway through the reign of Ahaziah. 2nd Kings covers 291 years, from 851 BC, the middle of Ahaziah's reign through 560 BC, when King Jehoiachin, who had been taken captive, was released by the king of Babylon. The whole of Israel is the geographical setting of the books of 1st and 2nd Kings. 1st Kings chapter 4, verse 25. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. Now, significant people in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. David, the 2nd king of Israel, 1010 to 970 BC, reigned for 40 years. Solomon, the son of David, in the 3rd king of Israel, 970 to 930 BC, 40 years. Rehoboam, son of Solomon, and the 1st king of the southern kingdom of Judah, 930 to 913 BC. Jeroboam, the 1st king of the northern kingdom of Israel, 930 to 909 BC. Now Elijah and Elisha, 2 prophets sent by God to call people back to him. Ahab, the 7th king of Israel, and his wife Jezebel, who together introduced Baal worship into the northern kingdom of Israel, 873 to 852 BC. Hezekiah, the 12th king of the southern kingdom of Judah, 715 to 686 BC. Isaiah, a prophet who encouraged kings and people to live for the Lord. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, who attacked Jerusalem 3 times, finally burning the city to the ground in 586 BC. Now, the key words in the book of 1st Kings is the kingdom division. The key words in the book of 2nd Kings is the captivity of the kingdom. Section 5, the theme and purpose of the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. The theme is that the welfare of Israel and Judah, the northern and southern kingdoms, respectively, depend upon the covenant faithfulness of the people and their king. The purpose of the books of 1st and 2nd Kings is the given account of the reigns of the kings of Israel, contrasting those who live for God and those who refuse to live for God. So we're going to look and discover a series of kings that served. 1st and 2nd Kings trace the monarchy of Israel from its greatest prosperity under Solomon to its demise and destruction in the Assyrian and Babylonian captivities. Each king is introduced with his name in relationship to the previous king, the date of his taking his throne in relationship to the year of the contemporary ruler in the other kingdom, his age upon coming to the throne for kings of Judah only, the length of his reign, his place of reign, his mother's name for king of Judah's only, a spiritual evaluation of his reign. And so we see the book of Kings may be divided in two sections. The United Kingdom under Solomon's rule, chapters 1 to 11, and the divided kingdom, 12 to 22. And so we see this division. United Kingdom is chapters 1 to 11, and then you see the Northern Kingdom and Southern Kingdom division. The Northern Kingdom is known as Israel. The Southern Kingdom is known as Judah. Here are two charts involving the list of the various kings, such as Rehoboam, mostly a bad character, through Hosea, and a bad person. And so you may pause and look at these kings if you want. Now Solomon's son Rehoboam rules two southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin. The two southern tribes take the name of Judah, the larger of the two tribes. Jerusalem is retained as the political and religious center of Judah. A total of 19 kings and one queen reigns over Judah. The reigns are recorded in 1 Kings 12 through 2 Kings chapter 25. Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials, rules the 10 northern tribes. The 10 northern tribes keeps the name Israel. The city of Samaria is made the capital of the northern kingdom. A total of 19 kings reign over Israel. Their reigns are recorded in 1 Kings chapter 12 through 2 Kings chapter 17. And then you remember Jesus going to Samaria. There the Israelites will have intermarried and so would be considered half-breeds. The book of 2 Kings may be divided into two main sections. The divided kingdom, 2 Kings 1 to 17. The section ends with Assyria attacking and defeating Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom. The remaining kingdom of Judah, 2 Kings 18 to 25. This section ends with Babylon attacking and defeating Jerusalem, the capital of the southern kingdom. Now, significant events in the book of 1 and 2 Kings. Section 1 of 1 Kings, the United Kingdom under Solomon's rule. Chapters 1 through chapter 11. In chapter 1, King David grows old. His son Adonijah attempts to take the throne. The prophet Nathan tells Bathsheba, who relays the message to David. David calls to Solomon and has him anointed and publicly acknowledged as king. Chapter 2. David gives his final instructions to Solomon. He dies after ruling the Israelites for 40 years. After David's death, Adonijah makes another attempt to take the throne. Solomon has him killed. Now 1 Kings chapter 3. God appears to Solomon in a dream and gives him an opportunity to ask whatever he wants. Solomon asks for wisdom and govern the people of Israel. God promises to give Solomon wisdom, plus riches and honor. If Solomon lives in obedience to the Lord during his life. Two women both claim to be the mother of the same baby. And Solomon, with his wisdom, makes a decision. He says, cut the baby in half. And the real mother says, no, get the baby to the other one. And so he discovers the real mother. Now 1 Kings chapter 4, a summary of Solomon's prosperity and wisdom, including his composing 1,500 songs, writing 3,000 proverbs, and wisdom, various types of plant and animal life. People come from all over the world to observe Solomon's wisdom. Chapter 5. Solomon makes the preparations for building the temple. Chapter 6. Solomon builds the temple, which is basically twice the size of the tabernacle. The construction work takes 7 years. Chapter 7. Solomon builds his own palace, which takes 13 years. Other construction projects, including the furnishings for the temple, are completed during this time. Chapter 8, a cloud representing the presence of the Lord fills the temple when the priests placed the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. Solomon offers a prayer, dedicating the temple to the Lord, and then sacrifices 22,000 cattle, 120,000 sheep, and goats and other offerings, and leads the Israelites in a 14-day celebration. God sends fire to consume the sacrifices and offerings, and God's glory fills the temple, 2 Chronicles 7, 1 and 2. The Israelites respond by bowing their face to the ground and worshiping the Lord. You may pause and look at this interesting facts about Solomon's temple. And here is a picture of Solomon's temple, which lasted 956 BC to 587 BC. Now, 1 Kings chapter 9, God appears to Solomon a second time. This time, God instructs Solomon regarding obedience to the Lord. And if thou wilt walk before me, as David thy father walked in integrity of heart and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded you, and will keep my statutes and my judgment, then will I establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised to David your father, saying, there shall not fail a man upon the throne of Israel. God also instructs Solomon regarding unfaithfulness to the Lord, what would happen. Now, chapter 10. The Queen of Sheba learns of Solomon's achievements and wisdom and comes to visit. She declares, half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceeds the fame which I heard. Blessed be the Lord your God, which delights in you to set you upon the throne of Israel, because the Lord loves Israel forever and ever. Therefore made he his king to do judgment and justice. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 7 and 9. The fabled Queen of Sheba. Now the Queen of Sheba had heard a report, and you see this, and you may look at this chart as far as what that meant. 1 Kings chapter 11, Solomon accumulates 700 wives, princesses or royal wives, and 300 concubine wives of lesser statute, many of them foreign women. This is in specific disobedience to God, who had told the Israelites not to intermarry with foreigners, because they would turn the Israelites' hearts away from the true God to worship false gods. Exodus 34, Deuteronomy chapter 7. As Solomon grows older, his wives turn his heart toward their false gods. Solomon builds places of worship for these false gods, including Shamash, the false god of the Moabites, and Moloch, the false god of the Ammonites. God raises up foreign adversaries against Solomon. Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials, rebels against the king. The prophet Ahijah takes off his cloak, tears it in 12 pieces, and gives 10 pieces to Jeroboam, symbolizing that Jeroboam would rule 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. Solomon tries to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam flees to Egypt until after Solomon's death. Solomon dies after Israel, having ruled for 40 years. His son Rehoboam succeeds him as the king of Israel. Now here's a slide of Solomon. You may want to pause it to look over his life, and so you'll see his reigns, his family, etc. Now, the divided kingdom, chapter 12 to 22. In chapter 12, Jeroboam returns from Egypt. The 10 northern tribes rebel against Rehoboam. They would become known as the kingdom of Israel. The tribe of Judah, his own tribe, and a portion of the tribe of Benjamin remain loyal to Rehoboam. These two southern tribes would become known as the kingdom of Judah, Israel. Jeroboam, the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel, does not want the inhabitants of the northern kingdom to travel to Jerusalem, the capital of the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom, to offer sacrifices as was the custom. So he makes 2 golden calves and places them in the convenient cities in the north, Bethel and Dan, so the people in the north would not have to go to Jerusalem. Rehoboam also installs his own priests not from the tribe of Levi, which God had ordained for the priest. So the same golden calves that Moses had destroyed are reintroduced. Now in chapter 14, Israel, Jeroboam sends his wife in disguise to the elderly blind prophet Ahijah. He recognizes Jeroboam's wife and informs her that God will bring disaster on the household of Jeroboam because of the king's idolatry. Jeroboam rules the kingdom of Israel for 22 years and dies. Upon his death, his son Naboth succeeds him as the king of Israel. Now Judah becomes the evil and idolatrous ruler under the kingdom and rulership of Rehoboam, the first king of Judah. There is civil war between Rehoboam, king of Judah, and Jeroboam, king of Israel, throughout their reigns, particularly along the border shared by Judah and Israel. Rehoboam rules the kingdom of Judah for 17 years, 930 to 913 BC. Upon his death, Abijah, also known as Abijam, succeeds him as the king of Israel. And in chapter 15, Judah, Abijah, the second king of Judah, does evil in the sight of the Lord for 3 years and dies. Upon his death, his son Asa succeeds him as king of Judah. Asa gets rid of the idols and wicked practices in Judah. Asa rules Judah for 41 years. Upon his death, his son Jehoshaphat succeeds him as king of Judah. Israel, Nadab, the second king of Israel, does evil in the sight of the Lord. Nadab rules Israel for 2 years, and then is assassinated by Baasha, who succeeds him as king. Baasha, the third king of Israel, does evil in the sight of the Lord. There is war between Judah and Israel throughout Baasha's reign. His son Allah succeeds him as the king of Israel. In chapter 16, Allah does evil in the sight of the Lord. Allah rules Israel for 2 years, then is assassinated by Zimri, a military leader in the northern kingdom who becomes king. When the inhabitants of Jerusalem learn how Zimri assassinated King Eli, they proclaim Omri, the commander of the army, as king, the sixth king of Israel. Zimri sets his palace on fire and dies after ruling Israel for only 7 days in 885 BC. Half of Israel supports Omri for king. The other half supports a man named as Tibni. After 6 years of overlapping reign, 884 to 879 BC, Tibni dies, and Omri becomes their sole ruler. Upon his death, his son Ahab succeeds him as king of Israel. Now Ahab, the seventh king of Israel, does more evil in God's sight than all the other kings who preceded him. He marries Jezebel, the daughter of a Phoenician king. Together they introduce Baal worship. In chapter 17, Israel, the prophet Elijah, tells Ahab there will be no rain for the next few years. God tells Elijah to take refuge by a brook and sends birds to feed Elijah twice a day. The brook dries up, and God sends Elijah to a widow in the town of Zarephath. She takes her last handful of flour and the last few drops of cooking oil and makes a cake for Elijah. God miraculously causes the flour and oil not to run out, feeding the widow and her household for many days. The widow's son gets very sick and stops breathing, but God used the holy man of God, Elijah, to bring the boy back to life. She had cried out, "Have you come to remind me or expose my sin?" In the death of her son. Oftentimes our sins haunt us when God means to have delivered us. Now the oral prophets in the Old Testament are Samuel, Nathan, Abijah, Elijah, and Elisha. The word of the Lord came to the prophet. Now here is the chart in regard to Elijah. And Elijah is quite a character. If you get a chance, listen to Dwight Pentecost preach on him. The miracles of Elijah: continuous supply of oil and meal, raising the widow's son, burning the water-soaked sacrifice on Mount Carmel, and then the last one. Now, chapter. Ahab's wife had been killing the Lord's prophets. Elijah proposes a contest involving himself and 850 prophets involved in the false worship of Baal. The contest is this. Whoever sends fire to consume a sacrifice will obviously be the true God. The false priests call out fanatically to Baal over a long time. However, Baal does not respond. He drenches the sacrifice area with water. He mocks them. Call upon your God. Wake him up. Maybe he's sleeping. And then after pouring 12 jars of water, God sends fire upon that sacrifice, the altar, and water in the trench. The observers fall and declare, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. That's power evangelism. Now here's a chart you may want to look at, the various famines that happened in Israel. Here's a chart of Jezebel. Any church Revelation calls Jezebel, that demonic person. In 19 says Israel, King Ahab tells Jezebel what Elijah had done, and she threatens to kill the prophet. Elijah flees for his life. God sends an angel to bring food and water to Elijah. God reminds Elijah there are 7,000 left in Israel who have not bowed their knee to Baal, and tells Elijah to anoint Elisha as his successor. Oftentimes, after a great victory such as they had at Mount Carmel, depression will hit, attacks will come. Now, in chapter 21, Israel, King Ahab wants the vineyard located close to the palace of a man named Naboth. But Naboth refuses to give it to him. Ahab tells Jezebel, and she has false charges brought against Naboth. He is stoned to death. God sends Elijah to prophesy of Ahab and Jezebel's impending death. Now, 1 Kings chapter 22. Judah and Israel. Ahab, king of Israel, and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, form an alliance to fight against Syria. Ahab disguises himself, hoping to avoid the predicted disaster. However, an enemy soldier shoots an arrow at random and hits Ahab between the sections of his armor, wounding him severely. Upon his death, his son Ahaziah succeeds him as king of Israel and Judah. Jehoshaphat does what is right in the eyes of the Lord. He makes peace with Ahaziah, the king of Israel. Upon his death, his son Jehoram succeeds him as king. Ahaziah will do evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, 2 Kings, the divided kingdom, Israel and Judah, chapters 1 to 17. In chapter 1, Ahaziah dies after he rules Israel for 2 years. He has no son, so his younger brother Jehoram, also known as Joram, succeeds him as king of Israel. Now, 2 Kings chapter 2. Elijah strikes the Jordan River with his rolled-up cloak. God parts the water, and Elijah and Elisha cross on dry ground. Elisha asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. Suddenly a fire and whirlwind take up Elijah to heaven, this chariot of fire. Elisha picks up Elijah's cloak and strikes the Jordan River, and it parts. That's one thing I've done the godly preachers as they were in their last weeks of death. Would you please pray a double anointing of God's Spirit upon me so that when you leave, I can continue. Now, 2 Kings chapter 4, Israel, Elisha tells a poor widow who has only a little oil left to ask all the neighbors for empty containers. God multiplies the oil to fill container after container. And the widow is able to sell it to pay her debts and have enough money for her 2 sons and her to live on. God uses Elisha to bring her boy back from death. Now in 2 Kings chapter 5, in Israel, which is the northern kingdom, Naaman, the commander of the Syrian army, gets leprosy. Elisha tells Naaman to dip himself in the Jordan River 7 times. Naaman does so and is cured. Elisha refuses to accept anything as payment, but then his servant Gehazi lies to Naaman and says Elisha has changed his mind. Naaman gives Gehazi some silver and 2 sets of clothes. However, God gives Naaman leprosy to Gehazi. Here's a list of the 10 miracles of Elisha. The Jordan River parting, 2 Kings 2. Spring purified at Jericho. Widow's oil multiplied. Dead boy raised alive. Poison in the stew purified. Prophet's food multiplied. Naaman healed the leprosy. Gehazi becomes leprous. An axe head floats. Armenian army blinded. God answered his prayers. Now, chapter 8. Judah, Joram, Jehoshaphat's son, who's also known as Joram, does evil in the sight of the Lord and walks in the ways of the kings of Israel. He marries the daughter of Ahab and introduces Baal worship in Judah. Ironically, while Joram, the son of Ahab, is attempting to eliminate Baal worship in the northern kingdom of Israel. 2 Kings chapter 3. Joram, the son of Jehoshaphat, rules Judah for 8 years. Upon his death, his son Ahaziah succeeds him as king of Judah. He walks in the ways of the house of Ahab, his grandfather, who was known as a wicked king. Sad to say, Grandpa influences grandson. 2 Kings chapter 9. Israel. Elisha instructs another prophet to anoint a man named Jehu as the next king of Israel. The prophet anoints Jehu and tells him to wipe out Ahab's household as a consequence of all the prophets that Ahab's wife Jezebel has killed. He does. 2 Kings chapter 10. Israel, King Jehu and Jehonadab, a leader who opposed Baal worship in Israel, tear down the temple of Baal and kill all the false prophets of Baal. Here are the various prophets. You may want to stop and look at this chart from Samuel to Amos. Chapter 12, Judah. Joash instructs the priests of Judah to repair the temple that Solomon had built. But by the 23rd year of his reign, however, the repair still had been not made. The priest Jehoiada places a chest near the entrance of the temple, and the people contribute enough money to fund the temple repairs. Joash rules Judah for 40 years, then is assassinated by 2 officials. Upon his death, Amaziah succeeds him as king, his son. In chapter 13, Jehaziah rules Israel for 17 years. Upon his death, his son Jehoahaz, also known as Josh, succeeds him as king of Israel. Jehoahaz does evil in the sight of the Lord. 2 Kings chapter 14, it says Judah, Mash, king of Judah, does what is right in the sight of the Lord, but he does not remove the high places of pagan worship. Amaziah rules Judah for 29 years, then is killed in a conspiracy. Upon his death, Azariah, also known as Uzziah, succeeds him as king of Judah. Israel. Jehoash rules Israel for 16 years, 797 to 781 BC. Upon his death, his son Jeroboam II succeeds him as king of Israel. He rules Israel for 41 years. Upon his death, his son Zechariah, not to be confused with the prophet, succeeds him as king of Israel. Now in 2 Kings chapter 15, Judah. Azariah does what is right in the sight of the Lord, but he does not remove the high places of the king of Israel. The Lord strikes him with leprosy that remains until his death, and the king lives in isolation while his son Jotham governs. In Israel, the northern kingdom, Zechariah rules Israel for 6 months, then is assassinated by a man named Shallum, who succeeds him as king of Israel. Thus the Lord's prophecy is fulfilled, that the 4 generations of Jehu's descendants would reign in Israel, 2 Kings 10:30. Shalem rules for 1 month, then is assassinated by a man named Menahem, who succeeds him as king of Israel. Menahem does evil in the sight of the Lord and rules Israel for 10 years. Upon his death, his son Pekaniah succeeds him as king of Israel. He does evil in the sight of the Lord and rules for 2 years and is assassinated by Pekah, one of his chief officers, who succeeds him as king of Israel. Then in chapter 15, Israel, Pekah, does evil in the sight of the Lord. Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria, also known as Pul, invades Israel and deports many of the inhabitants to Assyria. Pekah rules Israel for 20 years, then is assassinated by Hosea, who succeeds him as king. Judah. Jotham does what is right in the sight of the Lord, but he does not remove the high places of pagan worship. Jotham rules Judah for 16 years. Upon his death, Ahaz succeeds him as king. So we see in chapter 16, Judah, Ahaz, does evil in the sight of the Lord. He even sacrifices his own son by fire. Pekah, the corresponding king of Israel, forms an alliance with Syria and attacks Jerusalem. Ahaz seeks to help from Assyria and gives silver and gold in the temple and the palace treasury to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. Ahaz replaces the original altar that had been dedicated by Solomon with a replica of a pagan Assyrian altar in the temple of Jerusalem. Ahaz rules Judah for 16 years. Upon his death, his son Hezekiah succeeds him as king of Judah. Here's a chart of the list of the various kings. If you want to look at their reigns and dates, you can pause. Chapter 17. Israel, Hosea, does evil in the sight of the Lord. However, Shalmaneser, who succeeded his father Tiglath-Pileser as king of Assyria, learns that Hosea also formed an alliance with Egypt. Shalmaneser captures Hosea and puts him in prison. Assyria attacks Israel for 3 years, and the remaining inhabitants of Jerusalem are deported to Assyria, and the northern kingdom comes to an end. The king of Assyria repopulates the territory of Israel with non-Israelites. So we see these non-Israelites that intermarry with Jews who escaped captivity, and the descendants of these marriages would become known as the Samaritans, a people of mixed Jew and Gentile ancestry. The Bible clearly states the reason for the exile of the inhabitants of Israel to Assyria. The children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God and feared other gods and walked in the statutes of the heathen. So God had them exiled into captivity for their sins. In chapter 18, Judah, Hezekiah does what is right in the sight of the Lord. Hezekiah destroys the high places and symbols of idolatry, including the bronze serpent Moses had made in the wilderness, which apparently had become an object of worship. In the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign, the Assyrians also invade Judah, conquering many Judean towns. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, demands that Judah surrender, claiming there is no way they'll escape the power of the huge army of Assyria. So he calls upon his God. A prophet shows up, and God decides what to do with that huge army that he threatened Israel with. Aren't you glad we serve a living God who can answer our prayers? And so we see in chapter 19, King Hezekiah sends for the prophet Isaiah, who declares the word of the Lord, including the deliverance of Jerusalem and the defeat of the king of Assyria. Hezekiah trusts in the Lord, and in one night an angel kills 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, and the rest of the Assyrian army withdraws from Judah. Now in chapter 20, Judah, King Hezekiah becomes very sick, near to the point of death. Hezekiah prays and asks God to remember his wholehearted devotions. God grants him another 15 years of life. Upon his death, Manasseh, his son, will rule in Israel, in Judah. In chapter 21, Manasseh leads his people, but he leads them to do evil, more evil than the nations whom the Lord destroyed before the children of Israel. 2 Kings 21, verse 9. Manasseh rebuilds the places of idolatry his father Hezekiah had destroyed, and builds pagan altars in the temple. He even sacrifices sun by fire and practiced all kinds of witchcraft. He shed so much innocent blood that it fills Jerusalem from one end to the other. 2 Kings 21, verse 16. Manasseh rules Judah for 55 years. Upon his death, his son Amon succeeds as king of Judah. Amon follows his father Manasseh's example. He rules Judah for 2 years. Then his officials conspire to assassinate him and make his son Josiah king in his place. So God gets rid of this ungodly family line. Now in 2 Kings, remainder of Kings 18 to 25, chapter 22, Judah, Josiah does what is right in the sight of the Lord. The high priest Hilkiah finds a copy of the Old Testament law in the temple, the 18th year of Josiah's reign. Upon hearing the law read, the king repents on behalf of all Judah as he realizes the extent to which the people had fallen and had become disobedient. It's one of those areas when the reading of the Word of God brings, in effect, a national revival, and that's what we need. We are slipping into sin, and we as a nation need to repent. 2 Corinthians, or Kings chapter 23. Judah, King Hosea calls all the people together and reads to them from the book of the law. He urges the people to renew their covenant with God and commit themselves to obeying him wholeheartedly, and the people do so. Josiah orders anything connected in any way with idolatry to be destroyed. He reinstates the Passover celebration, which had not been celebrated since the day of the judges. And the scripture says, and like unto him Josiah, was there no king before him that turned to the Lord with all his heart, and with all his soul, and with all his might. Neither after him arose any other like him. 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 25. Now Josiah, he was a reformer. You may want to look at this chart and see from his early birth, a tender heart, a good start, straight course, good confession, peaceable end. I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. Thank God for godly rulers. Here's a chart for things that King Josiah did at Bethel. You may want to look at them, where he did what was right by destroying altars, by removing false prophets. Now here's the public reading of the book of the law. Moses speaks to the people, Exodus 20. Moses repeats the law, Deuteronomy 5. Joshua reads the law, Joshua 8. Joshua renews the covenant, chapter 24. Josiah reads the law, 2 Kings 2. Jehoshaphat reads the law, 2 Corinthians chapter 17. Ezra reads the law, Nehemiah 8. Speaking about Ezra, then he read from the open square that was in front of the water gate from morning until midday, before women and men who could understand. And the ears of all the people attended to the words of the law. So Ezra the scribe stood on a platform of wood which he had made for the purpose. And basically here is where we get an elevated pulpit for the first time. Now 2 Kings chapter 23, King Josiah is killed by Pharaoh's Necho, the king of Egypt, after having ruled Judah for 31 years. Upon Josiah's death, his son Jehoahaz succeeds him as king of Judah. But he does evil in the sight of the Lord. After 3 months in 609 BC, he is put in prison by the Egyptian Pharaoh Necho, who makes Jehoahaz's brother Eliakim the king in his place, and changes Eliakim's name to Jehoiakim. Pharaoh's Necho demands great quantities of silver and gold, so Jehoiakim taxes the inhabitants of Judah heavily. Now in chapter 24, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invades Judah and forces Jehoiakim to submit to him for 3 years. The Babylonians take many inhabitants of Judah captive to Babylon, including Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Jehoiakim rules Judah for 11 years, and his son Jehoiachin succeeds him as king of Judah. After Jehoiachin had ruled for 3 months, the Babylonians attack a second time, and Jehoiachin surrenders. The Babylonians take the treasures from the temple and the king's palace to Babylon. Thousands of Judah's soldiers, craftsmen are taken to Babylon, leaving only the poor people in Judah. King Jehoiachin is also taken to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar makes Jehoiachin's uncle Mattaniah the king in his place, and changes his name to Zedekiah. Now, interesting facts about Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. Nebuchadnezzar was the son of Nabopolassar. Nebuchadnezzar was placed as the head of his father's armies in 609 BC. Nebuchadnezzar took Palestine away from the control of Egypt in 606 BC. Nebuchadnezzar took some of the Jewish captives to Babylon in 606 BC. Among them was Daniel. In 606 BC, Nebuchadnezzar became co-regent with his father, Nabopolassar. Nebuchadnezzar became sole ruler of Babylon in 604 BC. He reigned for 45 of the 70 years that the Babylonian Empire stood. He broke the power of Egypt in the famous Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC. Nebuchadnezzar crushed a new rebellion in Palestine in 597 BC and took King Jehoiachin and many others captive to Babylon, among them Ezekiel. In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar burned Jerusalem and took more captives to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar's army besieged Tyre for 13 years, 587 to 576 BC. In 582 BC, Nebuchadnezzar invaded and conquered Moab, Ammon, Edom, and Lebanon. In 581, Nebuchadnezzar again took captives from Judah. 572, Nebuchadnezzar invaded and plundered Egypt. In the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign as sole ruler, which was Daniel's 3rd year in Babylon, he experienced his dream of the great image, Daniel 2. In Daniel 4, Nebuchadnezzar was smitten with a mental condition in which he saw himself as a wild animal and tried to act like one. He died in 561 BC. Daniel exerted a powerful influence over Nebuchadnezzar, and 3 times the king called on the God of Daniel. The city of Babylon was massive, with walls 60 miles around, 15 miles on each side, 300 feet high, 80 feet thick, extending some 35 feet below the ground. Now in 2 Kings chapter 25. In the 9th year of his reign, Zedekiah rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. King Zedekiah's sons are executed in his presence. Zedekiah's eyes are put out, and he's taken captive to Babylon. The Babylonians burn the temple and every other important building in Jerusalem, and the remaining leaders in Judah are killed, and any remaining influential residents of Judah are taken captive to Babylon, exile. Jehoiachin, the next to last king of Judah, is released from prison in Babylon 37 years after having been taken into exile. Jehoiachin is treated kindly the rest of his life by the evil monarch who had become king of Babylon, Merodach. Here are a list of people that have served in prison throughout both the Old Testament and New Testament. So some of you have been in jail. Here's some of your buddies. Now, interesting facts about First Kings. You may want to pause this particular timeline and look in on this. And then we see a further brief chronology of the Bible. Where are we? And then we continue to see the time periods involved, a journey through the Bible. Where exactly are we at this time? And you could pause, look at this. Now take your phone, look at the QR code, and here's your homework. And so the 7 to 9 minute videos for each one of these are kind of an encapsulation of what's been taught. And then here's a master list from the homework. Now, the notes are by Dr. Rich Costanza, and I appreciate him allowing this to be used for Native ministry. And then you can find this at nativemi.org, threefeathersministry.com. And my name is Robert DeCora. You can reach me at robertdecora@gmail.com. And you're welcome to use this as an individual to teach a Sunday school class, teach a Bible class, to use for your church services. Literally, you could have 39 weeks if you wanted. One of the books of the Old Testament each week being taught. PowerPoints, videos, notes, and everything you need to teach the class.